The air in our mother's living room was thick with the scent of stale coffee and hypocrisy. My brother Mark folded the single sheet of paper with a flourish, his face a perfect mask of sorrowful duty. "I know this is hard, Ethan," he said, his voice dripping with a fake solemnity that made my skin crawl. "Mom made her wishes clear. The house. It's to be left entirely to me." His wife, Karen, shot me a look of practiced pity from across the room, her hand resting on Mark's arm as if he were the one about to be thrown out onto the street. My aunt and uncle, sitting on the worn floral sofa, nodded gravely, their eyes filled with sympathy. For him, they saw a grieving son, the responsible one, burdened by the weight of an entire estate. I saw a thief in a well-tailored suit. He let the words hang in the silence, a final, triumphant declaration of his victory. They thought their little performance was convincing, but they had no idea our mother had left me one final gift, a recording that would burn their lies to the ground. My hand was steady in my pocket, my thumb resting on the side of my phone. It felt heavier than a brick, a silent judge waiting to deliver a verdict that would shatter their perfect world. That forged will, the one Mark had so confidently read aloud, wasn't just a document. It was a confession, signed and delivered. He thought he was closing a chapter, but he had just handed me the weapon I needed to start a war he could never win. They were celebrating his inheritance, but all I could see was the beginning of his downfall. You might wonder why my own brother would stoop so low as to fake our mother's will, to steal the very roof that sheltered us. The answer is simple. Because for my entire life, he was the golden child, and I was the ghost who haunted the hallways. He was the one destined for greatness, and I was the one expected to make sacrifices to pave his way. To understand how we ended up in this room, with a fake will between us, you have to understand the family I was born into. It's a story that starts not with hate, but with something far more damaging: indifference. It began in this very house, long before the paint started to peel and the floorboards began to creak under the weight of our family's dysfunction. Growing up, this wasn't a home for me. It was a stage for Mark's endless parade of achievements. He was the sun, and I was the planet that silently orbited him, my only purpose to reflect his light. I remember the year I turned 12. I had saved up for months from my paper route to buy a second-hand telescope. The day I brought it home, I spent hours setting it up, my heart pounding with excitement. That same afternoon, Mark came home with a B+ on a history test. My parents threw a mini celebration, ordering pizza and praising him for his brilliant mind. My telescope sat in the corner, unnoticed. No one asked to see it. No one cared. This was the pattern of our lives. When Mark scraped his knee, he was rushed to the emergency room for stitches and ice cream. When I fell out of a tree and broke my arm, my father sighed and told me to stop being so clumsy before driving me to the clinic, complaining about the cost the whole way. My straight-A report cards were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear." Mark's participation trophies were displayed on the mantelpiece like Olympic gold medals. He was given allowances. I was given chores. He was encouraged to follow his dreams. I was told to be realistic. My mother would often say, "Mark is sensitive, Ethan. You need to be stronger for him." It was my job to be the stoic, responsible bedrock upon which my brother could build his fragile ego. I learned to be invisible. I learned that my needs didn't matter unless they aligned with supporting Mark. I fixed his bike. I did the homework he copied. I even took the blame when he crashed our dad's car into the garage door. Each time, I was punished while he was coddled. It wasn't loud, screaming abuse. It was a quiet, insidious poison that dripped into my soul every single day. It taught me a powerful lesson. My worth wasn't intrinsic. It was measured entirely by my utility to my brother. So, when Mark stood in that living room and read a will that erased me completely, it wasn't a shock. It was just the logical conclusion to a lifetime of being treated like I didn't exist. But what they never understood is that when you ignore someone for long enough, you stop paying attention to what they're capable of. They never saw me as an investment, only as a resource to be tapped for Mark's benefit. The final proof came the summer after high school graduation. My acceptance letter to a top-tier engineering program, complete with a partial scholarship, was tacked to the refrigerator door. Next to it was Mark's acceptance to an obscure, wildly expensive private arts college. One evening, my parents sat me down at this very kitchen table. The air felt thick, suffocating. "Son, we've looked at the finances," my father began, studying the wood grain as if it held all the answers. "We can only afford to send one of you to college right now." My mother picked up the thread, her voice soft and pleading. "Mark needs this, Ethan. He's a creative soul. He won't thrive without this specific environment. You're so practical, so resilient. You'll find a way." They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They wanted me to give up my dream so Mark could finger paint and write bad poetry on their dime. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Years of being the family shock absorber had taught me the futility of it. I just nodded, a profound coldness spreading through my chest. In that moment, I wasn't their son anymore. I was just an obstacle to their favorite son's happiness. The next morning, I took the money I'd saved for textbooks, packed a single bag, and walked into a military recruitment office. I left a simple note on my perfectly made bed and was at basic training before they even realized I was gone. I had to get away. I had to forge an identity that they couldn't touch, couldn't exploit, couldn't sacrifice. For 10 years, my only contact was a Christmas card and the occasional stilted phone call. I built a career in military logistics, a world of order and consequence where effort was rewarded and excuses got you nowhere. I saved my money, invested wisely, and became the man I was told I could never be. Then, the call came. It wasn't from Mark, of course. It was from a neighbor, telling me Mom's cancer had returned and she was declining fast. When I took emergency leave and walked through that front door for the first time in a decade, the decay was palpable. The lawn was a mess of weeds, and inside, the air was stale. Mark, the golden boy with the expensive degree, was working a dead-end sales job and was buried in debt. He and Karen treated my mother's illness like an inconvenience, bickering over who would take her to her appointments. For the first time, my mother looked at me not as a fixture, but as a lifeline. She saw the son who had been thrown away had somehow succeeded, while the one she had mortgaged her life for was a bitter failure. My military training kicked in. I assessed the chaos and established order. Within a day, I had arranged for a qualified in-home nurse to manage our mother's care, paying for it out of my own pocket without a second thought. I spent the first weekend back fixing the broken porch swing, patching the hole in the hallway wall, and cleaning out the gutters that were choked with years of neglect. I restocked the pantry and the fridge. Mark and Karen watched me with a mixture of awe and resentment, their inaction thrown into sharp relief by my efficiency. "Must be nice to just fly in and play the hero," Karen remarked sarcastically to Mark one afternoon, loud enough for me to overhear. They didn't see an act of love for a dying mother. They saw a judgment on their own incompetence. The real shift happened late one night. Mark and Karen were out at the movies, a much-needed break, they'd claimed, and I was sitting by my mother's bedside, reading to her. She stopped me, placing her frail hand on my arm. Her eyes, which had been cloudy for weeks, were suddenly sharp and lucid. "I was a fool, Ethan," she whispered, her voice raspy but firm. "I spent so long convincing myself that your brother was a masterpiece that I didn't realize I was sanding you down to nothing to make his frame look better. I see it now. I see everything. Strength isn't loud and needy. It's quiet. It's what you do when no one is watching. That was always you. I am so sorry." A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. I simply squeezed her hand. The apology I never thought I'd receive had finally arrived, not with fanfare, but in a quiet room at the end of her life. It didn't erase the past, but it soothed a wound I thought would never heal. A few days later, she became agitated. "He'll take the house," she said, her breathing shallow. "Mark, he thinks he's entitled to it. He won't respect a piece of paper, Ethan. He'll say I was confused, that you pressured me. He has to hear it from my own mouth." She was right. Mark's entire life was built on his ability to rewrite reality to suit his narrative. A simple will wouldn't be enough. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the nightstand. "Just talk, Mom. I'm recording." For the next 10 minutes, she spoke with a clarity that belied her illness. She laid it all bare. Her regrets, her pride in me, her profound disappointment in Mark, and her final unchangeable wish that I, her forgotten son, should inherit the home. It was her final attempt to balance the scales. When she passed away 2 weeks later, Mark delivered a beautiful, tear-jerking eulogy. He held Karen's hand and looked every bit the devastated, dutiful son. I stood in the back, a silent observer, clutching the one inarguable truth in my pocket. I knew his performance wasn't over. The grand finale was yet to come. The sympathy casseroles from the neighbors were still in the refrigerator when Mark and Karen began their conquest. I came downstairs one morning to find Karen in the living room with a measuring tape and a swatch of gray fabric. "These floral curtains are just dreadful," she announced to no one in particular. "I'm thinking something more modern, clean lines." Later that day, I found Mark in the garage, sorting through our mother's personal keepsakes into 2 piles. A small keep pile for himself, and a large charity pile that contained things I knew Mom had cherished. They weren't grieving. They were liquidating a life. They spoke of the future, of renovations, of how much the property value would increase with a new kitchen. They were erasing our mother from the home she had built, and she hadn't even been gone a week. About 10 days after the funeral, Mark approached me with a furrowed brow, a look of deep concern he had perfected as a child to get out of trouble. "Hey, Ethan," he started, his tone carefully casual. "I've been looking everywhere, and I just can't seem to find Mom's will. Did she ever, give it to you for safekeeping?" He was fishing, trying to see if I held any cards. I looked him directly in the eye, my expression unreadable. "No, Mark, she never gave me a will." It was the truth. She hadn't given me a piece of paper, she'd given me a recording. A wave of visible relief washed over him. He thought the coast was clear. He thought I had nothing. Predictably, 2 days later he called me, his voice brimming with feigned excitement. "You're not going to believe this. I found it." He claimed the will had been tucked away inside our mother's antique music box. It was her favorite. She must have put it there so I would be the one to find it. The story was sickeningly sentimental, a perfect lie designed to legitimize his claim. He then declared we needed a formal family meeting to read it aloud. He insisted on inviting our aunt and uncle to be there, not for support, but for an audience. He needed witnesses to his great inheritance, to publicly solidify his ownership and make it harder for me to object without looking bitter and grasping. I agreed to everything. I watched him meticulously set his own trap. He was so blinded by greed, so confident in my historic role as the family doormat, that he never questioned my silence. He mistook my calm for defeat. He still saw me as the boy who silently accepted his fate, the one who would step aside without a fight. He didn't understand that the world had forged me into something else entirely. As I walked into that living room and took my seat on the worn floral sofa, watching him prepare to deliver his final, triumphant blow, I felt a profound sense of peace. He thought he was closing the show. He had no idea I was about to play the encore. So there we were, back in the stuffy living room where it all began. Mark finished reading the last sentence from the forged will, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "And so, with a heavy heart, I will honor her final wish and take responsibility for the family home." He carefully folded the document and placed it on the coffee table as if it were a sacred text. Karen dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. "Oh, Mark," she cooed. "She trusted you so much." My aunt and uncle murmured their agreement. "She always knew you were the one to count on," my uncle said, shaking his head sadly. They had all swallowed the lie. Hook, line, and sinker. I let the scene hang in the air for a full minute, allowing them to marinate in their shared delusion. I wanted Mark to truly feel the weight of the victory he thought he'd won. Then, I broke the silence. My voice was calm and even, cutting through the thick, sanctimonious atmosphere like a razor. "That was a beautiful performance, Mark. Really." He looked up, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "It means that for a document you supposedly found in a music box, it sounds an awful lot like something you and Karen cooked up at your kitchen table last week." The color drained from his face. Karen gasped, clutching her chest in mock horror. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "You're just a bitter, jealous man because your own mother saw you for what you are." My aunt shifted on the sofa. "Ethan, this isn't the time or the place. Your brother is grieving." "Is he?" I asked, my gaze locked on Mark. "Because grieving men don't typically forge signatures on legal documents." I reached into my pocket and slowly pulled out my phone, placing it on the coffee table next to his fraudulent will. The two objects sat there, one representing his lie, the other representing the truth. "You see, Mark, you made one critical mistake. You assumed Mom's final words would be written on paper. You forgot how much she loved to talk." Mark's eyes were wide now, a dawning panicked horror flickering within them. He looked from the phone back to my face, finally understanding. "She was worried you would pull a stunt exactly like this one," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "She knew your greed better than anyone. So she decided to leave a message that couldn't be faked, couldn't be challenged, and couldn't be erased. She left her testimony." In her own voice. I unlocked the screen and held my thumb over the play button. "Shall we listen to what Mom really wanted?" Mark's mouth flapped open and closed like a fish on a dock, but no sound emerged. Karen's face, which had been a mask of righteous indignation, was frozen in disbelief. Before either of them could gather their wits to stop me, I pressed play. Our mother's voice filled the room. It was frail, thinned by her illness, but it was unmistakably hers. Amplified by the phone's speaker, it was clear and resonant in the tense silence. It was as if her ghost had taken a seat right there with us, ready to hold court. "Ethan," her voice began, and my aunt flinched at the tenderness in her tone. "My dear, strong son, if you are playing this, it means I was right to worry. It means your brother has let his greed overcome his love one last time." The color drained completely from Mark's face. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Her voice continued, laying bare the family's entire sordid history. She spoke of her regret over the college decision, her sorrow at having been so blind for so long. She spoke of her pride in the man I had become, all on my own. Then she addressed Mark directly. "Mark," she said, her voice laced with a profound and final disappointment. "I love you, but I see you clearly now. You took every advantage I gave you and built a life of debt and excuses. This house cannot be yours. It needs a caretaker, not a gambler. You and Karen treated my final days as an inconvenience." Karen let out a choked gasp, her eyes darting toward our aunt and uncle who refused to meet her gaze. They were staring at Mark, their faces hardening with every word our mother spoke. The final verdict was delivered without mercy. "This home and all of my savings are to go to Ethan. This is not a slight to you, Mark. It is a correction." It is the payment of a long overdue debt for a future I allowed to be taken from him. This is my true, final, and legally binding testament. Do not fight it. For once, accept the truth. When the recording finished, the silence that fell was more damning than any accusation I could have ever made. I calmly stopped the recording and put the phone back in my pocket. I didn't need to say a thing. Mom had said it all. My uncle was the one who finally broke the silence, his voice low and rumbling with anger. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his favorite nephew. "Mark, did you lie to us? Did you fake that piece of paper?" Mark began to sputter. She was confused. Her mind was gone. Ethan manipulated her. "Enough," my aunt snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "We heard her. We all heard her." I stood up, signaling the end of the proceedings. "The meeting is over." I looked directly at Mark, whose entire world had just crumbled around him. "That document you forged is a serious crime. I could have you prosecuted, but I won't, on one condition." I let the words hang in the air. "You and Karen will pack your bags. I want you out of my house by noon tomorrow. Don't leave anything behind." Karen's face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You'll regret this, you snake," she spat, her voice a low hiss. But the threat was hollow, impotent. She was a queen without a kingdom. And she knew it. Mark was utterly broken. He couldn't look at me, couldn't look at his aunt and uncle. He just fumbled with his coat, his movements clumsy and defeated. As they shuffled towards the door, my Uncle Bob stopped and turned to me, his face etched with a shame so deep it was painful to watch. "Ethan, son, we were wrong about everything for years. I'm so sorry." My Aunt Carol just nodded, her eyes welling up as she looked at the man I had become. And the shell of a man her favorite nephew had been revealed to be. They walked out of the house, leaving Mark and Karen alone in their disgrace. After they were gone, the silence that settled over the house was no longer oppressive. It was clean. It was peaceful. I walked to the coffee table, picked up the forged will, and with a calm, deliberate motion, I tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter into the trash can. It was a lie that no longer had any power. I went to the large window in the living room, the one that was always kept shut, and pushed it wide open. A cool evening breeze swept through the room, carrying away the lingering scent of stale coffee and bitter resentment. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe in this house. It was finally mine. They arrived at 10 the next morning, not with a moving truck, but with a small, dented trailer hitched to their 10-year-old car. It was a pathetic sight. They moved in silence, packing the few belongings they had prematurely moved in and the trinkets Mark had tried to claim. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking a cup of coffee, a silent overseer of their quiet, humiliating retreat. As Mark carried his final box through the doorway, he paused. He looked small, lost. "Ethan, where are we supposed to go?" he whispered, the question of a child who had just been told playtime was over. I took a slow sip of my coffee before I answered, my voice steady and devoid of any emotion. "That stopped being my concern yesterday, Mark." He just stared at me, the full weight of his new reality finally crashing down on him. All the lifelines were gone. All the safety nets he'd taken for granted had been packed away in my emotional attic years ago. He turned without another word and loaded the last box. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive off until their car disappeared around the corner. The sun was shining. The house was quiet. The debt had been paid in full. The long, silent war of my childhood was over, and I had won.